Wow. Just one word, wow. Kami Mamdani, as the president has quoted, referring to his guest in the Oval Office there for the past several months, looked like best friends with President Trump now. I mean, it was an extraordinary meeting. We missed, of course, the conversation they were having before they met with the press that went on for about a half hour. The meeting, according to both men, was very cordial. The president saying he wants Mamdani to succeed as best as he can to make New York what it can and should be. Charlie Hurt and I have been watching this extraordinary event. Charlie, I have to tell you, first of all, I got to give credit to Tony, the sound guy, because he said in my ear, he said, Mamdani looks like a kid standing next to his father, listening to his father talk with that certain deference to the father, et cetera. I mean, the first question I was going to ask you, so what could these two people possibly have in common? Well, the president just said what it is. First of all, a love for New York, a love for winners. The president was clearly impressed by his political acumen, which was extraordinary in becoming the mayor, coming from nowhere to become the mayor of the biggest city in the United States. But what did you make of it?
And also the ability to manipulate the media to get done what you want to get done. Trump has been the master of that, unlike any politician that we've ever seen. Mamdani is very good at that. He's very good at using the media to reach voters. Trump pointed that out, and I loved. He said, you know, he genuinely believes that I'm a little suspicious about some of the ways he wants to get there, but he genuinely believes Mamdani does want to make New York City great again. And he said, I'll be cheering for him the entire time if he can make that happen. Obviously, all of this crashes on the real issues like taxes. And, you know, anytime you hear somebody like Mamdani use the word affordability, grab your wallet and run, because his ideas of affordability and how to get there and the results of it are very different from your or mine or any sort of normal person's idea of how to get to affordability. But this is the greatest thing that Mamdani has going for him in his relationship. Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He is the least ideological president we may have ever had. He doesn't care about ideology. He really does want to find things that work. And that drives conservatives crazy on some days. And these days, it mostly drives the left crazy because he's winning at with a lot of these things. And I think that I would not be surprised if they did not end up finding some kind of mutual ground. But Mamdani is going to have to give up on a lot of his crazy.
A lot of those things. And Tim Doescher also joins us now from Unleash Prosperity. He's the executive director of that wonderful institution. Tim, let's get to the differences in understanding of that word affordability from President Trump to Mamdani, because of course Mamdani believes that affordability requires an enormous increase in the size of government. We should mention that New York City already has a $300 billion debt. The debt per capita of New York is greater than any city in the United States. So it's already got financial problems, but he wants to double up on those financial problems by spending a lot of money on a lot of different things that, frankly, we don't have. I say we because I live in New York. Let's just start with one, affordable housing. He wants to spend $100 billion over the next 10 years to build 200,000 housing units. Of course, he also has universal child care. That's going to be about $6 billion. Free buses. We've heard a lot about that. $800 million. And it goes on and on. I mean, an enormous increase. But just to talk about that first issue, affordable housing. Basically, what his goal is, and he's mentioned this before, is to end private ownership of housing. He uses the Marxist phrase, decommodify. He wants to decommodify, which means taking the tradable value out of an asset, housing, and give it over to the government. I mean, Donald Trump has made his fortune, his billions of dollars in housing. Clearly, he doesn't want the government to take over private housing. How do those two conflicting interests get together and meld?
Well, look, David, this is an incredible thing. I was, hearing the song "Two Hearts Beat as One," and I was hoping for, "Hot and Cold" by Katy Perry. I was just hoping that they were going to be completely different. But Zohran Mamdani actually said we agree on the way to get to affordability, and like you just mentioned, no, they don't. They absolutely do not. Free buses, free childcare, attacking landlords, and pushing towards government housing is not the viable pathway to prosperity. And let me tell you what's going to happen here, because we've seen it since New York went basically socialist over the last 20 years. People are going to move out. They already have. We've already seen, 2 million people move out of New York, state of New York, losing, a $500 billion between New York and New Jersey down to states like Florida and down to states like Texas. That's what's going to happen. And so what's going to happen?
And we should mention, Tim and Charlie, that I think we can put up on the screen that tax exodus, and we call it a tax exodus. Some Mamdani apologists have said, no, that's not necessarily why people left New York. Well, from 2012 to 2022, long before the pandemic, people started moving out. 1.7 million people have left this city, this great city, and it corresponds with an increase in the top tax rate of 8.8% up to 10.9%. Now, Charlie, 10.9% is huge. And that, again, corresponds to that tax exodus that Tim pointed out has happened. And he wants to raise taxes even further. He doesn't seem to comprehend that there is any disincentive for raising taxes. That is, that people can move their capital elsewhere. That's another conflicting area that he has with the president.
You mean like reality? He wants to deny reality.
I'm so glad you used that word. That one of these guys lives in a real world. He builds real things. He manages real people, et cetera. That's Donald Trump. He's been doing it his whole life. The other one lives in a world of fantasy.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that Mamdani didn't come as a reaction to Donald Trump or as a reaction to Republican policies. New York City is one of the most aggressive governments in the country at regulating all of this. We have seen this movie that Mamdani is promising, and we know where it ends. It ends in the unaffordability crisis that New Yorkers are suffering with right now in terms of living, in terms of rent. We got here because there are tens of thousands of properties all over New York City that are not available because landlords don't want to deal with the regulations. Secondly, we're also here because you had millions of illegals coming across our open border under the previous administration and coming to places like New York City. And New York City was giving them free housing. Taxpayers, not only did that raise the price.
Free medical care, free debit cards, for goodness sake.
And not only did that crowd out where New Yorkers here could live, they were also having to pay the bills for it. So this is a crisis in reaction to Democrat policies, and it's not going to work any better than the first 20 years of the Democrat policies.
Well, the bottom line, Tim, is that what we just saw was the first of many meetings that is going to have to happen between those two guys. The president's 100% right that they both seem to care. I know that Donald Trump cares about New York. He put his heart and soul into this place. Not only did he build buildings, he built the Woolman skating rink that the city had done a terrible job in trying to fix up. So how does it end? Does it end up in bankruptcy? Does the president bail out in any way this guy's spending plans when they go bust? How does it end?
Well, look, I don't think the president's in a position right now to be bailing out the city of New York, who, only 20% of the people voted for him. I don't know if I see that politically, but I will say this. Mamdani needs about $7.5 billion with a B dollars from the federal government to make up that massive $116 billion budget that New York has. So I think that this meeting was exactly what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be there. Nice, we're getting along, so that money that comes from the federal government isn't threatened, and I think that that's going to happen. But I do think that there is going to be some incredible headwinds coming for Mamdani, especially when he has to deal with Albany with raising taxes. He's going to have to raise taxes. There's no question about it.
Well, and that's going to cause even more tax revenue to leave this state. Very quickly, Charlie, we're out of time, but is he going to get a bailout from Donald Trump?
No, I don't think so. And I don't think it has anything to do with the voters here. I think it has to do with the fact that it's just fundamentally unfair. You can't put taxpayers across the country on the hook so that politicians in a place like New York City can play these weird games that
Marxist
don't work.
politicians from New York City. Let's be clear. All right, gentlemen, great to see you both. Tim Doescher, Charlie Hurt. What an amazing moment that was.